Yo, what's up guys, Jerome here, and we just got done with a day 1 Gnomeregan. I wanted to share the most up-to-date info on all the bosses, all the new loot, all the raid strategies we had, the raid comp strats, the consumables, the pre-bis, everything. If you watch this video, you should be able to smash that week 1 Gnomeregan no problem. Before we talk about all the boss mechanics and strategy we learned from our full clear though, we need to talk Gnomeregan lockouts so you don't miss any loot. The first 2 lockouts will act like molten core resets or like any other classic raid. For North America, that means the first reset will be on February 13th with the second reset on February 20th. Getting these 2 initial lockouts will be crucial to make sure you maximize your chance at epic loot. Then after the 20th, we have to remember the lockouts will go back to just being like BFD with a 3-day lockout. So now that we understand the lockout system, let's get back to what you actually need to do to clear the raid. Although you might think we didn't have any pre-bis gear going into the raid, we actually had quite a few high-level pieces. The best part is that all of my gear came from just 3 places. The first place was the Scarlet Monastery wings. I was able to get the White Mane Chapeau and the Triune Amulet really quickly. And while I was in Scarlet Monastery, I also got the Shadow Fiend Quality of Life book. That really helped with my mana regen throughout the raid. I also had some very strong PvP rings and a cloak pre-purchased. That meant I could immediately put them on when I hit the level requirements, as well as my Exalted Warsong bracers too. My real secret sauce though was the updated crafted gear. Blizzard went through a lot of the crafts in the game and drastically increased their stats. Knowing that, I reached out to my tailoring friend when I hit 40. I was able to get pieces like the red Mageweave pants and the Dreamweave vest before even going in the raid. The one thing we really did miss out on going in the raid though was full sets of runes. I really missed key runes like Dispersion for mana regen and Empowered Renew for extra healing. I'll link the Wowhead page below the video so you can grab the extremely desirable runes that I never got to use in the raid. One really cool feature for actually deciding which runes and gear to use is a free site run by Warcraft Logs called Archon. That site uses raid data to show you the average gear, the average enchants, the average consumes of anybody that cleared the raid at a high parse. Keep in mind that this raid data is updated daily though, so we're not going to have the very best picture of what everybody's running until we get more clears. Alright, so once your gear is set up for success, you've got to figure out your raid logistics and group comp. Gnomeregan is a 10-man raid, which means the comp you choose will have a huge impact on whether you succeed or fail. We went with a balanced comp because we had a theory the raid would have certain fights that are good for melee while having other fights that are good for ranged damage dealers. We used 2 healers as well as a mix of warriors and hunters and casters. That setup really felt ideal for us even in the raid, and we're definitely going to continue with that comp in the next week. On top of the comp, one of our keys for success in the raid was bringing the right consumes and buff items. We all had our own personal consumes like the 12-12 food and the greater mana pots and the rage pots. As a mana user, I also brought minor recombobulators for the raid to spam on me in longer fights. And I also brought festival dumplings from the lunar event to stack with my moonberry juice to maximize mana as I ran through the pulls. We also brought a stack of fire protection potions and nature protection potions. Those really came in handy, especially on Thermaplugg. Don't forget to check out my full consumables video up here for everything you need to bring. Another trick we used was to not actually unboon our Black Fathom buff until we wiped in the raid. That way we made sure we weren't just gonna randomly lose our world buff, falling to our death, or dying to a landmine. Alright, so going into the raid, the first boss you're gonna fight is Grubbis. This is a wave-based encounter just like it was back in the old days. The difference is that after the first several waves, a green cloud will spawn. This will follow the closest player, so we just ran that and the ads together to make sure the ads got killed. After a few waves, the boss will spawn, and you need to keep doing that mechanic while 2 tanks pick up the boss and the ad. Overall, this fight felt completely overtuned, and our key ended up being nature protection potions. We popped 1 before the fight and 1 during the burn phase, and that allowed us to easily kill the boss after 5 attempts. The second boss was the Viscous Fallout. We made sure to position the boss away from the dead bodies on the ground that we assumed the elites would spawn if certain boss spawns reached them. The ranged were presumably making sure to focus on ad-related activities, though I was busy healing. The key though was that the tank made sure to move the boss out of the poison on the ground. The first time he ended up being a little bit slow on that and we nearly wiped, but next week this should be one of the easiest fights. The third boss we fought was the Crowd Pummeler. His big mechanic is a very obvious nuke and that's pretty much it. You just have to watch his feet for the direction and make sure not to get thrown off the platform. In his last phase, he'll pick targets and charge at them and eat them. This is just a big amount of damage on one target, so you have to blast heal through it while not getting hit by the very obvious nuke. Then the fourth boss we smashed into was Electrocutioner 6000. We assigned 2 groups of 3 and marked them. Group 1 goes out and soaks as the furthest distance characters from the boss. You just keep swapping the two groups, so at least one group is always soaking the lightning debuff. You'll also want one backup soaker because of the second mechanic, and that mechanic is a giant AoE debuff that goes on a player and they simply need to run out. The fifth boss we fought was the Menagerie Boss. The biggest focus was to fight away from the exploding sheep, at least for the melee. Then you have the 3 other mobs being tanked, but the dragon is ideally tanked by a second tank. That's so he can be pulled out when he does his fire mechanic that absolutely destroys the tank. Unrelatedly, the dragon will be breathing fire on a line in the raid, so make sure to avoid that. All 4 enemies have to die at relatively the same time. Our biggest mistake was not getting enough DPS on the sheep, so make sure you're ranged or focus on doing that too. The other mistake was not using all the buttons in the room on cooldown. These give mana back to your healers and your casters. Immediately after finishing off the Menagerie, Thermaplugg just sort of spawned on top of us and destroyed us, so get ready for that. The key to Thermaplugg is the buttons around the room. You press the button nearest to where the bombs are coming out to stop them. We assigned 2 hunters and 2 mages to do this job, and it felt extremely key to have 4 fast players assigned. As the bombs came out, the ranged DPS would try to kill them as best as they could. The first phase, we tanked the boss near the entrance to avoid terrible bomb RNG. The tank ended up having to kite to avoid an extremely high damage debuff. We also used pet taunts to reset stacks when things got out of hand, which worked amazingly. Then in Phase 2, it became a mana-intensive, pure tank and spank fight in the middle of the room. The stars were still the hunters and mages pressing the buttons and killing the bombs. The key for me on healer was pressing one of the buttons on CD unrelated to the bombs to keep getting mana back. After this phase, things were kind of a blur, but it's pretty much the exact same experience 2 more times. The big thing is that there is a spell that needs to be kicked or you'll wipe. Other than that, at this point, it's just a mana management fight. Alright, so let's talk about some key loot things you need to understand going into the raid. The first thing is that you're going to be getting these items called grime-encrusted objects. Everybody should pretty much just agree to need on these to make it simple. You have a chance of getting all sorts of nice items like true silver bars at the vending machine near the middle of the raid. The second thing to understand about loot is that your tier loot sets are just dropped as tier tokens now. The tokens can easily be exchanged at an NPC in the middle area of the raid. I would recommend trying to figure out in advance what set you plan to buy. The third loot thing to understand is that this raid is way harder than people were expecting. That means you may need to be willing to write off certain pieces on Grubbis and Thermaplugg. I would say at least until we get some more gear, or if they add some nerfs in. Clearing Gnomeregan Day 1 was definitely a long-term goal of mine. We went in with really solid pre-bis items, we went in with the best consumables we could get, and the very best group comp we could possibly come up with. Even a great group is going to end up having a few wipes, especially on Thermaplugg, so just be ready to run back and get back in there. I do have a question for you guys, which is whether you've actually entered the raid yet and what you think of Phase 2 so far. For me, leveling and getting into Gnomeregan were absolute blasts, and I can't wait to get into the STV event as well. You should definitely subscribe so I spare your life and we have a nice truce in the STV event. And of course, if you know anybody struggling with the raid, make sure to share this video with them. And then check out my 5 things to do first video to make sure you're on the right track even after leveling, even after raiding.